recently, for whatever reason, there's this theme of fearing the Lord. Remember in 1 Samuel chapter 2, in verse 31. And again, we have to constantly understand the Lord, fear the Lord, and things. We don't understand everything. But in verse 31 of 1 Samuel 2, it says, "The time is coming when I will put an end to your family." That's quite the statement. We're going to revisit that several times tonight. The time is coming when I will put an end to your family. Is anyone else getting an echo? Is it just me? I don't know if it's where I'm standing or what. That's better. So his family is said it's going to come to an end. When God says your family's coming into an end, guess what? It's coming into an end. And why it's coming into an end is the sin that's been so rampant. And these pages, these next bits are so sad, like we talked about last time, because they were avoidable. It didn't have to shake out like this. But Eli had been the judge for 40 years, and things have just slidden. Let's go to verse 12 of 1 Samuel 5. In 11, the ark is captured, and Hophni and Phinehas are killed. And then there's this weird moment. In verse 12, it says, "A man from the tribe of Benjamin ran from the battlefield and arrived at Shiloh later that same day." So God has already started to do what he said he would do. Eli's sons are dead. Remember, there's been a mass slaughter, and 30,000 Israelites have literally left the battlefield to run home. They've gone to their homes. They've gone to their houses because they're scared to death. 30,000 of them fell the second time. And Eli is sitting there. It says, "A man from the tribe of Benjamin ran from the battlefield, and he arrived at Shiloh later that day. He had torn his clothes and put dust on his head to show his grief." This is kind of one of those pictures, right? Like, it's well and good to do that, and they did those things, and so I understand why they do that. But do you see, it's a bit late for all of that? It's kind of like we do these religious things. We do, and he's torn his clothes and puts dust on his head to show his grief. That's what they did. That was a normal manifestation of God. We need your help. But where were the people when all of this was going on? Like, there's just been this absolute lack of, even from the day of the judges, that no one's really seems to be following the Lord. And he tears his clothes and he puts dust on his head to show his grief. But when it's the Lord that's producing this, when it's the Lord that's coming after you, what is that going to do? I mean, when you're at the point when your grief comes from the judgment of God, guess what? There's no, remedy for that. It's too late. Look at what he says. This is really interesting. So Eli was waiting beside the road. Now, if you ever wanted to know how, just this picture of Eli, he's sitting on the road. He's waiting to hear the news of the battle. What must be ringing in his mind? What was the promise of God? Your sons are going to die, and they're going to die what? On the same day. And he knows he's gone too. And it's not just him it's going to affect. Can you imagine this picture of Eli sitting at the road waiting to hear what's going to happen? He already knows. He already knows. And there's nothing he can do about it. Remember what Samuel has said? There's no offerings. There's nothing you can do about it. You've gone too far. God's coming, and that's it. And again, I have this picture in me of, I not only do we not want to get there, but do you see how he started up? He probably started very well, but he's ending in this manner. I don't want to end like that. I don't want to end my race with this it's a pitiful scene. Eli is old. He's 98. He can't see. He's sitting beside the road to hear the news of the battle. And it says, for his heart trembled. And this is crazy. It's almost like he's absolutely just resigned himself, which he should have, I guess, to his sons and him dying. Look at what he's concerned about. And this is kind of complicated. It's kind of confusing. And many commentators say he still had a heart for God. But it's kind of a weird deal. He's sitting there at the road. Remember, the ark has come in, and they thought they were going to win, and it didn't. And it says, he's waiting beside the road, for his heart trembled for the safety of the ark of God. That's what he's worried about. But do you see how strange that is? The ark of God. What does the actual ark mean if God's not there? Like if God's not with it, if not God's not on it, that's just a wooden box. What made it more than a wooden box is the power and the presence and of God and the mercy seat and all of these things. But they used it last time, remember, like a rabbit's foot. Like, we don't want to get serious with you, but if we bring the ark in, then everything will be all right. And they're absolutely gobsmacked when it doesn't work. And why doesn't he ask about, like, look at what he says. His heart trembled for the safety of the ark of God. It's a shame he didn't have that fear before, right? It's a shame that he didn't, like, get serious before. He doesn't say his son. Look, when the messenger arrived and told what had happened, an outcry resounded throughout the town. So at Shiloh, this outcry comes. This messenger has obviously been heard, and all everyone can hear is the ark is gone. The ark this battle is gone, or the ark's about to go. Look at what it says. When the messenger arrived and told what had happened, an outcry resounded throughout the town. So there's this outcry, and Eli says, what is all the noise about? The messenger rushed over to Eli, who was 98 years old and blind, and he said, I have come from the battlefield. I was there this very day. Part of that is the sackcloth and the dust on his head. Eli's pretty blind, but anyone that knows, if you see the clothes and you put dust on your head, you already know what. Yeah, you already know it's not good. You already know it's not good. And so there's this resounding, this trembling, and Eli says, what's happened? What's happened? I've come from the battlefield. I was there this very day. And he asks in verse 16, what has happened? Eli demanded. And then this picture goes on, this moment that God has just retreated. And again, if God retreats, then what hope do you have? And as we talk about seeking first the kingdom of God and following him, and adding all of these things to us, that's our hope. But Israel is lost. And it's not just a one-day thing. It's not just a one-time thing. Look at what it says. Israel has been defeated by the Philistines. We talked about that last week. That automatically means what? When you read that statement, remember, it's not Israel versus the Philistines. It's never physically just Israel versus the Philistine. It's God versus who? In Egypt, who was it? It was God versus who? It wasn't really just God versus Pharaoh. It was God versus all of their gods. In Philistines, they had all of these multiple gods, and it was God versus God. When God steps back and it looks like he's been defeated, everyone should pay attention. The testimony of Israel has been shot. And can you see how damaging that is? Because to the naked eye, it looks like Israel has got beat, right? They've just lost 30,000 in one day. What is the problem with that? Israel is a representation of who? They're a peculiar people. They're the light of that world. Israel is synonymous with who? With God. So that when Israel loses, it's seen that what? That God loses. Think about today, who is the church synonymous with? Jesus. So when the church is perceivably defeated, when the church is losing, who do people think is losing with that? Jesus. Their testimony is rank. The Israelites have got problems. And they've used this ark, and God's going to step back and he's going to turn it all around. God is so amazing. He's teaching the Israelites. He's teaching through Eli. He's going to teach through Samuel later, but he's also going to teach that he's winning, that he's God of all gods. And we're going to see that in a minute. But there's this picture, and it says, what happened? Verse 17, Israel has been defeated by the Philistines. Eli knows that's not by chance, that's not by... Can you imagine sitting there knowing? And by the way, this again, we have to understand that sin, you can't isolate sin. Like you can't sin and it only affect you. Like if sin only affected you, then there's some level of, well, that's your fault, that's your problem. But think about that. Does sin ever affect anybody else but you? Yeah, of course it does. The sins of Eli, the sins of his sons, They're now coming and they're manifesting themselves on who? Remember with Achan, they go out to fight and they lose. Why do they lose? Because Achan has brought sin in the camp. Look, the same is said for church. Our lives have some kind of effect. Do you think your holiness affects Lawrence Drive? Of course it does. I'm not saying today that if you sin, God's going to shoot us all and we're all dead and it's all over. But that's part of what we don't want to see today. We're very consumer friendly. We come to the church to get what we want to get, but we forget that we're also to give a lot too. And part of what we're to give is our responsibility when we sign up to be a member, when we sign up as part of the body of Christ, is to be holy as he is holy. That's a massive responsibility. And look, it's easy to see the pastor as you better be holy, and there's a correlation, I get that. But don't you think every one of us has that call to be holy? Like, what happens if Eli had been holy? What happens if Eli had done what God had asked him to do? They would have won. And today, don't you see that Eli is this picture of this just failed? He didn't want to challenge his sons. And yet this is how, again, I've said this before, but Eli losing 2 sons, they've lost the ark, and he's about to die. How much worse could it be? Like, at what point do you say, God, I should just do what you want me to do because this ain't working? No one reads this story and says, Eli, you made a good decision. And he's sitting there on this, and by the way, God doesn't describe everything. He just says what? He just says, you're gone. Where's Eli at? He's nowhere near the battle. He's not in the battle. He's safe, right? He's just an old man sitting on a chair. He's good. And yet God, down to the nth degree, has a way of doing it, whatever he wants to do. See, whilst to the naked eye, Eli looks safe. His sons are in the battle. And by the way, they would be at the back. As a priest, they would be at the back. So if you think about it, if I'm at the back and I'm getting killed, what does that mean that slaughter's like? Like, the priests were safe at the back, right? Oh, you people, that. So if we're going to fight today, I'll be at the back. You guys go forward and we'll be good. Right? Bill Wood's going to lead us and I'll stand way at the back. But if they can pick off Bill because he's at the front. But they shouldn't be able to pick me off. But they have. They've killed the priests. Primarily why? Because when God says it's over, guess what? There's no protection. There's no help. And Eli, God's got a sense of humor. He has to. I mean, when I tell this story and they haven't heard it, people don't believe it. Look what happens. When the messenger mentioned what had happened, to what? What is he worried about? What would you expect his first thing to be about? His sons. But it's almost like he's already what? He's already given that up. He already knows. And now, what is the point of having the ark if you don't follow God? It's this weird notion of they've messed up the rules, they've done their own thing, and he wants to know what happened to the ark of God. When the messenger told him what had happened to the ark of God, that it had been captured, what happens? He fell backwards from his seat beside the gate. Who ordained that? Was that an accident? If you're the coroner, who caused that? Just think about this for a moment. Do you believe that God caused him to fall backward on a chair, knowing how fat he was, that he would break his neck and it would do one time? What does that tell you about God? He knows everything, right? He plans everything to the what? To the nth degree. And here's what I'll tell you. You worry about a lot of things in your life, right? If we believe tonight that God ordained that just the right way, the way I'm not medical, but surely there's a certain way you have to be sitting, and the chances of breaking your neck, you have to fall a certain way. God also used the fact that he was fat and said, well, that'll help. I mean, imagine if you were like, we're going to kill this dude. How are we going to do it? Well, let's just tell him something frightening. Maybe he'll fall over and he's so fat he'll break his neck. It doesn't seem like the greatest plan. Like if you're trying to kill me, you might put me on a thing and, right? But God has planned this out. And God moves the way. I don't think Eli knew his time was up. But isn't it funny? He wasn't fighting. He's old. He's sitting there. He seems safe. And all of a sudden, the Bible just says, he fell backward from his seat beside the gate. He breaks his neck and he was what? He's dead. When I ask you if you worry about stuff, how did that happen? God orchestrated everything. To his reaction, to the timing, to the using his weight, to the sitting at the right angle on the right seat. God orchestrated all of that. And if we believe that tonight, then why are we worried about what he's going to do in our lives? Like, oh God, you orchestrated that to the nth degree, but you can't help me financially. God, you orchestrated that to the nth degree, but this might be too difficult for you. Do you see he's a God who just basically said, Eli, you're done, and guess what? Boop, done. He could have just keeled over. God could have done. Why do you think God did it? God could have killed him any way he wanted to. He could have drank poison wine. He could have done anything. He could have had a heart attack and everyone would. See, here, I'm not trying to be funny, but that's an interesting point. Why did God kill him the way he did? That's a good segue. I should pay you for that. If he died of a heart attack, what's the problem with that? Why? Because he's fat and old. Yes. So if you die because you're fat and old, then no one really pays attention, right? What are the chances of him reacting like this, falling back? I mean, okay, it might happen, but it's much more news. It's much more terror. It's much more different to hear that than old boy fell over heart attack. Well, we've been waiting for that. He's a big old boy and he's 98. I mean, no one's going to be like, oh! But this story I've told this story to people and they're like, you're just making this up. I'm like, yes, that's what I did. I just made it up. I remember in Texas around a Bible study, I mentioned that. They're like, we've never heard that. I'm like, well, it's right here. And we had to go to it. And they were like, well, all right. He broke his neck. He died. He was old and overweight. God knew his age. God knew his weight. God knew all of it. And he falls over and he's dead. And it said he had been Israel's judge for 40 years. And in the time of the judges, they all did what? And in the judges, all it is this repeated cycle of, I'm in trouble, God steps in, they start to mess around again, they get in trouble, God steps back, they cry out, he steps in. It's just this repeated cycle. And after 40 years, this is how it ends. So from 58 to 98, he's been their judge. And now he sits there, and he's dead. When that happens, what should Israel do? They should take notice. But look what happens. This is, by the way, it just clicked, but look at verse 19. Eli's daughter-in-law. Now, what was the promise? Hold on, what was the promise in chapter 2 that we read at the start? Who is God coming after? His whole family. Okay, you know who's in his family? His sons, but who else? Which is crazy that he had a daughter-in-law because we read about the sons. What were they doing? What were the sons doing? What was part of the sin of the sons? Oh, the offerings of meat, but what else? Okay. You see the problem? He has a wife. Not that you can sleep around without a wife, but it's not just like there's all kinds of issues, right? And see, we walk through life, and what does the world tell us? What does the devil yell at us all the time? It's your life, just what? Mm-hmm. And it won't affect what? Mm-hmm. It's my life, I'll do what I want. God's over all of this. And it's like he's just strategically, imagine God's just coming after your family like this. You know what you can do about it? Look, his daughter-in-law, the wife of Phinehas, was pregnant and near her time of delivery. When she heard that the ark of God had been captured. See, this is weird. They're all worried about the ark, but no one seems to be saying anything when they're throwing it out and messing up the whole rules. Like, it's just weird. They have this obsession with the ark, which I get if you're doing things right. Like for Joshua, the ark was amazing. It stepped in the Jordan River. It all worked out. The ark's an amazing thing, but it's like they've lost this awe, they've lost this fear, and it's just become this like rabbit's foot that they carry around. It's almost like sinning today and carrying your Bible and thinking this will just save you. Like I can do what I want, I've got my Bible in my hand, what's God going to do? No. Look at what happens. She's pregnant, near the time of delivery. She hears that the ark of God had been captured. Is that coincidence? Is any of this coincidence? No. She was near her time of delivery. God even waits for this. When she heard that the ark of God had been captured, that her father-in-law and husband were dead, rough day. Her father-in-law is dead. Her husband's dead. She went into labor and gave what? You see it, the sadness of this picture? She's just given birth. And then in verse 20 it says what? She died in childbirth. How? Why was that an accident? Was that some medical problem? The only reason she dies in childbirth is what? God said, I'm coming after all your family. I don't think that's coincidence. I don't think it was like, well, that's just a sidebar and she accidentally died. God could have stepped in, right? So the same God who's orchestrating Eli falling off a thing is also over this pregnancy. It happens to, she gives birth early and she goes into labor and she gives birth and she dies in childbirth. At what point do we think, you know what, we probably should fear the Lord, because this is the whole reason all of this is happening. If you ask, why is this happening? It's the fear of the Lord. They had no fear of the Lord. They did what they wanted. And then they want to play like, oh, we'll come back. No, it's too late. Look what happens. She died in childbirth, but before she passed away, I love this. Remember the Hebrew midwives? The midwives tried to encourage her. That's this amazing picture. The midwives tried to encourage her. But when the hand of the Lord is against you, when the hand of the Lord is coming in discipline, when the glory is kind of departed, what can you really do to encourage someone? Here's what I'm saying. If the Lord takes his hand off you, what are you going to be encouraged with? Like as a believer, our whole encouragement is centered around who? We make a mistake when we're encouraged by what? I mean, if you're encouraged by your money, guess what can happen? If you're encouraged by circumstances, they can, and to a level we can be encouraged by things. But when you can't find encouragement in God, as in when God's like, no, we're done here. The Hebrews, the midwives, they're trying to encourage her, and it says, they said to her, don't be afraid. You have a baby boy. But she didn't answer or pay attention to them. Verse 21, she named the child Ichabod, which means the glory's gone. Or where is the glory? You imagine that. The last thing she did was name her child Ichabod. You know how many kids want to name Ichabod? But the question is tonight, the question from his name is, where is the glory? Well, where is it? You see, it's gone, but it's not gone, because by the time you get to chapter 5, you'll see that God's glory is still right there. But do you see, why have some churches folded? God can call churches to disband. I don't have a hard time believing that. There's a time, a place, a season. But why have some churches disbanded? Because the glory's gone. Because when God takes his hand off of it, the natural phenomenon is death. So if we said about any, and I don't have a church in mind, but if you said the glory's gone, what is that always directly related to? Whose fault is that? And what are they doing? Yeah, they're doing what they're doing. And you see, it's too late. Listen, there's part of this that we need to understand. We're in a war, right? They're at war with the Philistines. It's too late. You see, they had nothing. They thought they could get away with not really concentrating on obedience or relationship to God. So they have all of these years, they have all of these days, they're allowing all of this stuff, they're mishandling the offering, the sacrifices, they're being sexually immoral, all of this stuff is going on. Do you see that what we need to understand is that a battle is just around the corner? It always is. And what we have the tendency to do is, whilst it's see, for a while, it looked like Eli was getting away with it. For a while, it looked like his sons were getting away. For a while, it looked like that God wasn't really going to do anything about it. But then this battle comes with the Philistines. And here's what I mean. Why weren't they ready? They had no relationship. They didn't understand. And their best effort was, oh man, we just need to bring the ark. We don't need to do much else. It's almost like I just need to go to church. And if I go to church, everything will be fine, right? But do you see that we have to be prepared? Had they been prepared, had they understood God, had they really had a fellowship with God and understood him, somebody would have said, you can't go in to the Holy of Holies and take that thing. You can't, this isn't the way. But when nobody is spiritual, where do you think the thing's going? What I'm telling you is a massive battle will always come in your life. And what we do is we float around until the massive battle comes, and then we expect ourselves to respond and react correctly. That's not the way that works. When the 3 Hebrew boys are getting thrown into the fiery furnace, you think they would just got strong that day? How in the world do you look at the king and say, we don't care what you do, our God can save us or not, I'm in? That was who knows how many days of what? Of preparation, of prayer, of seeking God, of knowing him. And I'm telling you, I think we make the mistake whilst life's fine, we just plod along. And then bam, here comes this battle. And we wonder why we're not ready. Like they weren't ready. The Philistines come, they're fighting the Philistines. That should have been an easy fight. And yet they haven't prepared. They don't know God. They're messing around. And there's no one with wisdom. There's no one with this power. And look at what she says. The glory. Where is the glory? Aren't you glad that when we don't give God the glory, he still gets it? Here's one thing I've learned, that especially with Dad, but we have no authority. Like sometimes we pray, or I do, and we say, God, you can get the glory this way. We kind of try to get what we want, and we add on, but that'll be glorious for you, right? Like, heal them because that'll be for your glory. What we really mean is, heal them because I like them to be healed. And on top of that, you can get your glory. You realize that the God's going to take his glory however he wants, right? And if his glory is in killing Eli by falling off a chair, guess what he's going to do? God gets to choose. Like at Lawrence Drive, we seek God's glory. But none of us are the architect of that. None of us are the orchestrator of that. Like God gets to dictate how he glorifies himself. When, with who, all of that. None of that is our choice. We don't get to say, well, this is how we'll do it. And no. God's the architect of his glory. And so it seems like the glory's gone. Where's the glory? Israel's glory is gone. She named him this because the ark of God had been captured and because her father-in-law and husband were dead. So she says the glory's gone because the ark's gone. Is that true, though? It's not. And by the way, because Eli and her husband are dead, they weren't exactly glorifying the Lord, were they? I mean, if they're your people that are, we needed them to glorify the Lord, well, guess what? That's a sad state of affairs. The glory's gone. Why is the glory gone? Because we've lost our trophy. We've lost the ark. We have to have that. The glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God has been captured. Here's a question. When did the glory disappear? Even that day, when did the glory disappear? When did God's hand retreat? If it didn't retreat, look, with all the sexual stuff and all that, it's gone. But even in just that, forget all of that. If you just come to this bit of it, when did the glory of God retreat? When did the hand of God retreat? It's when they walked in and did their own thing with the Ark of the Covenant. Like they think losing my dad now or my father-in-law, the glory's gone. Wait, the glory was gone. The hand of God, the blessing of God was all gone when you decided to do your own thing without a fear of the Lord and drag the ark to places it was never meant to be. They literally went into holy God's place and said, we're going to do this what we want. And that's what humans fight. We want to do it our way. And so God, here's what I love about God. He gives us a chance to glorify him. But if we won't, guess what? He will. And how will he glorify himself? And this is what's sad. I don't want to be the person that God was going to bring glory through and fail so bad that he now chooses somebody else. Now here's the thing. God is very gracious and he's very loving and he allows us to be the vehicles that he uses to glorify himself. Think about that. He uses us. He doesn't have to. That's how he uses his bride. He uses people. He uses people to glorify him. He uses miracles. But primarily he uses us. And when we won't do it, but don't think for a moment that God's glory is contingent on your goodness. Like if you don't do it, somebody will. And if nobody will, guess what? Guess what? God is big enough to do it what? So think about this. Who's in this moment? Samuel has just come on the scene. So you look at Samuel and you admire Samuel, but notice he's not here. You know what they didn't do? Ask Samuel if this is a good idea. And you know why they wouldn't ask Samuel if it was a good idea? Because he'd have told them what? You ever not wanted to ask your parents because you know what they're going to say? And they say it's better to ask for forgiveness and permission, right? I'm not sure that that's a good way to think, but... Okay, so the glory's gone, right? Who's going to lead Israel? It's all hopeless, right? You want to mess around? They've messed around, and God's just starting again. But look what happens. God has a way. Remember what the Bible says? God will turn around everything for our good and his what? His glory. Look at this. Why are the Philistines so confident? Because the power of God has been put into question. And I'm afraid that's the truth in our world today. That if we live weak Christian lives, it leads the world to think there is no power in us. You ever thought of that? I mean, if the church isn't glorifying God, why would the world be scared of that? No, they don't. The biggest problem isn't that Eli's dead and all that. The biggest problem is God used who? God used Israel to glorify himself. And when Israel won't glorify him, then who is? Nobody. And what it does is it brings into question, here's what the carnal mind thinks. This God isn't really what? Because to their mind, he's just been what? He's just been defeated. He's just been defeated. We took him, right? And look what happens. Now these people, they don't want one God. And Dagon's this like father of Baal. He's this fertility god. He's half fish, half man. I mean, people think Christians are weird. But worldly people like worship things like half man, half fish that doesn't speak, doesn't move, it just stands there. I mean, this is what they have. But the Philistines refuse to believe that there's only one what? That there's only one God. And so they kind of they spread their bets and, well, if we have, it's Egypt all over again, right? There's a God of the Nile, there's a God of the sun, all of this. We have all of these gods and hey. All right, so look at chapter 5. The Philistines captured the ark of God. They took it, listen to this, they took it from the battleground. There's a battleground and God's people have lost. God hasn't lost. God has allowed, in fact, God has shown us before, because we might misread the story and say, God, what are you doing? Eli's dead. No, he already told them, you're going to die. So that when it happens, we know for certain that what? God didn't lose that battle. He just took his hand. They captured the ark of God. They took it from the battleground at Ebenezer to the town of Ashdod. Now God resides in what? In Philistine territory. Where is God meant to be? Where's God meant to be? In the Holy of Holies. Where is he? He's in Ashdod. How much help does he need to get himself back? Who's he going to use? And look what happens. God, you can almost imagine the angels sometimes. This is a disaster. Oh, hold on, this is going to get good. See, God fights for his own testimony. If we won't, he will. Like, if we don't do a good job, it's a good job. God's like, well, if you mess this up, we're all messed up. Look at what happens. They took it from the battle. That's just a sad indictment, this sad picture. It was a battleground, and it wasn't, again, please, it wasn't Israel versus a Philistine. It was God versus like Dagon. It was God versus all of these Philistine gods. And to the naked eye, it looks like God's lost one. They carried, listen to this, they carried the ark of God into where? Into the temple of Dagon. And they, here you talk about like blasphemy. You talk about a lack of fear. They had no idea what dynamite they're playing with. But why would they? You see the problem? Why did they not have a fear for the ark? Well, if God's people don't fear the ark and fear God, guess what? Why would they? To the Philistine mind, that ark doesn't give off much what? Power. There's not. But look, notice what happens. Again, they don't just worship who? They don't just worship one God. They don't just worship Dagon. And here's the problem. Is it okay to have God on level terms with another God? Of course not. But look what they do. And remember, God with Eli, I think that's almost, if it wasn't so sad, it'd be semi-humorous. But look at the story. Look at how it happens. They go into the temple of Dagon and they place it beside what? They place it beside an idol. You know what that's saying? That's their God. This is our God. And they're pretty much what? Mm-hmm. You think God puts up with that? They've basically just declared. And how bad is it that God's ark is now in Philistine territory next to Dagon? And the big question in everybody's lips is, who's stronger? Who's best? What now? Oh, they done messed up. They done messed up. And they place it beside an idol of Dagon. God is humorous, I think. He's patient. He's gracious. He's also just. He's powerful. He has wrath. There's all kinds of things. Do you catch what happens next? Look at verse 3. This is amazing. God, you tell me God doesn't have a sense of humor and knows how. What happens the next day? Hold on. What happens the next day? They think they've got something to what? They think they've got something to show off. And so you know what they're like? Hey, we won. Come and see what we took. Come and remember the God of Israel, the one that beat all the Egyptians? We beat what? We beat him. We've got the trophy. And notice what happens. They call the whole town. It's like 10 a.m. Come to the temple. We've got a doozy to show you. Because maybe someone said we should be scared of the God of Israel. And now they're like, hold on. Come tomorrow. This is going to be awesome. They call the whole town meeting. Look at what it says. When the citizens of Ashdod went to see it the next morning. So there's been a call. Come see this trophy. That's what you do in war, right? When you win, you show off what? You show off the spoils. And they're all excited. Woo, we just don't have Dagon. We have Israel's God. I mean, life couldn't be any better, right? And they walk in. You imagine they're all hyped up, right? But when the citizens of Ashdod went to see it the next morning, Dagon had what? Okay, hold on. I'm not trying to oversell this. How did that thing fall? How did the statue, how did an idol that was upright, the silly half fish, half man thing, how did it fall and how did it land in posture to worship God? Who did that? How did he do it? Did he have to send 20 spies in and be like, we're going to sneak you in, you've got to put it down? How did the idol fall? God just said what? And God was powerful enough to figure out all the whatever physics and all of that to get it to not just fall and break. He didn't want it to break the first time, so guess what? It don't break. He's powerful. Look, if we had, what would we have to do? We'd have to sneak in. We'd have to grab it. We'd have to put it down. We'd have to posture it so it's in the right bit of worship. All God has to say is what? Fall over. And it falls over in just the right spot at just the right time. And he does it where nobody knows. If they had known, what would they have done? They'd have picked him back up. Put that into your life. Do you agree that God can speak that and that to the absolute perfect moment, and the absolutely perfect way, in silence, whatever, God can just speak it and Dagon fall? If you believe that, then again, what are you worried about? What is it in your life you say, God, I know you did that with Dagon, but you can't do this? That's silly. You see, this comes with a bit of responsibility. Whilst what God is showing his glory, God, it seems like God's defeated. He's like, okay, just so you know, I'm not defeated and I'm going to prove it. How embarrassing is it that, look at what happens. They've got this show and tell, and they place it, but when the citizens of Ashdod went to see it the next morning, Dagon had fallen with his face to the ground in front of the ark of the Lord. Okay? Fear the Lord. What do? And think about how stupid this is. A God that you have to help is no what? If God needs your help, how much God is he? I mean, God's already won round one. You're on the floor, you can't get up. I can put you down, but you can't get up. God's already won. Like, if you're... Look, I don't know why you'd worship a half fish, half man thing. But telltale sign number one is, what are you doing, Daddy? We got to lift God up. What? Yeah, he fell over. God's absolutely, like she's just said, where's the glory? Well, wait a minute, it's coming. It's coming. Verse 4. So that was sign number one. What should they have done? What should they have done? Yeah. Worship God and got rid of the what? They got rid of the ark. This is crazy. It takes them 7 months to figure it out. 7 months of messing around, getting defeated. The next morning, the same thing happened. Dagon had fallen face down before the ark of the Lord again. This time, his head and hands had broken off and were lying in the doorway. Only the trunk of his body was left intact. You see the irony here? God has called the same thing, but this time his what? This time his head and hands had broken off and were lying in the what? Perfectly in the doorway. Okay? What can idols not do? The Bible says it. They can't see and they can't what? Hear. And they can't help. You see what God's getting at? Fishman is just he's got no head and hands. Now we're going bizarre. You mean Fishman's going to help us? Yeah. Well, now he's got no head and no hands. God has spoken it, and his head and his hands just happen to fall off at just the right way and just the right... Look, I'm not trying to oversell this, but if God can do that, again, what are you worried about? Like we sit here on a Wednesday night and we smile and say, God, you're powerful, and wow, you orchestrated everything, and you killed the enemy so easily. I mean, God isn't even like needing a coffee. He's not, he's just sitting there saying it. They can be done. And guess what? Bam! Can't he do that now? Like we sit here and we mentally assert to I don't think anyone in here saying, well, I just don't believe this. You believe it, right? But then tonight we go home and get a bad report. And we're like, oh, well, hold on. All you need is God to what? Speak. And if he doesn't speak, there's a reason. Like, if God, as long as God can open his mouth, we're all right. Now, sometimes he'll open his mouth and we need to be disciplined, and it's frightening. Only the trunk of it. Okay, we talked about it. When God moves, how we respond next is what? It's pivotal. What should they have done? Okay, we're out. This ain't working. We're 0 for 2. Fishman's got a problem. And we're in trouble. But look at what happens, verse 5. This is why to this day neither the priests of Dagon nor anyone who enters the temple of Dagon in Ashdod will step on its threshold. Instead of repenting, they made some weird spiritual thing and they were like, oh, we're just not going to we'll not step on the threshold. It's like way over. That's what they took out of that. We just need to make this spiritual ritual that no one entering the temple of Dagon should step on its threshold. Because stepping on the threshold is a bad thing. Like, that's what caused it. Look at verse 6. And the Lord's heavy hand. Now, hold on. The Lord's heavy hand, what does that mean? That means when God moves his hand, what? What can stop it? But who's God's heavy hand been on? Both what? Israel and the Philistines. He struck the people. Where did the ark go? The ark went to Ashdod, right? All the citizens come out to see God being defeated. And Israel's God is our God, like ours now, and we have it, and we've got the rabbit's foot, and we're going to be good. Remember, the Israelites shouted, and the ground trembled, and the Philistines were scared to death. And now they've won, and it's all in Ashdod, and we're winning. And God moves. And in verse 6 it says, his heavy hand struck the people of Ashdod. Who did that? Who did God use to do that? Nobody. He just said what? And the nearby villages with a plague of tumors. They don't really know what that is. There's two options, it seems. One is it's associated with rats and mice and the bubonic plague. And one is hemorrhoids. I mean, I'm not just making it up. You could say that's a real pain in the butt, right? But whatever God did, he sent something on them. Either the plague or hemorrhoids. Either one, probably not what you want. And I think if God's given you the plague or God's given you hemorrhoids, it's not just a light case. And God just moves. It's like, Eli wouldn't show me. His sons wouldn't show me. Israel not interested in showing my glory. I'll just take over. He will not have his testimony defeated. He will get his glory. And it says, Ashdod and the nearby villages got a plague of tumors. Verse 7, when the people realized what was happening, they cried out. We can't keep the ark of God of Israel here any longer. He is what? Okay, so they're starting to put 2 and 2 together, right? He is against us. Oh, wait, I thought a minute ago you were having the town come out and celebrate. What's happened? Well, it appears, here's the thing. If you got a tumor, where would your first port of call be? Who would you speak to about it? Well. But even before that, yeah. Why not go to Dagon? Well, he's a bit broken at the moment. I mean, if he's God, why not go to him and ask him to help with the tumor? You know what they know? Intrinsically, you know what they know. Dagon's no match for this. And if you want to be silly about it, just look you imagine going and he's all duct taped up. I'll finish here, and we'll pray. But do you see how messed up it is without God? Look at what they say. He is against us. We will all be destroyed along with Dagon our God. So, he's bigger. He can destroy Dagon, right? Yeah. So they called together the rulers of the Philistine towns and asked, what should we do with the ark of the God of Israel? The rulers discussed it. And what in the world was their plan? This is how insane it is. This is like ungodly 101. You imagine that. If we had something in Macon that was causing tumors, imagine having a meeting and saying, just ship it to Warner Robins. That's basically what they did. They don't send it out of the Philistine camp. They say, look at what, can you imagine? Look at what they say. Hey, we had this meeting, and what we did is, we don't want it anymore. Why? Well, we got tumors. Can you imagine? So they move it to the town of what? Of Gath. Can you imagine? Why are you sending it to us? I'd rather not tell you. But they're about to find. Can you imagine? Can you imagine Gath when they put 2 and 2 together? In fact, by the time they try it again, the town's like, forget it. We don't want this. You see how messed up and evil that is? Like, God is beating us. God is defeating us. We're getting tumors. Dagon's no use at all. So just give it to Gath. In verse 9, and we'll finish. But when the ark arrived at Gath, the Lord's heavy hand fell on who? Its men, and young and old. He struck them with a plague of tumors, and there was a great what? So God, where the glory had been gone, so to speak, is now showing up. But where's he showing up? In Philistine. And do you realize that as crazy as it was, do you see that God's behind even the movement of that? Like, why would they send it to Gath? Why would you send it to your own? Like, let's hope none of them had relatives in Gath. Why would they send it to Gath? Who's behind that, really? The Lord. Why would the Lord want to move it to Gath? Because in city after city after city, he's going to tell them what? The glory's still alive. I'm God. And you're not just going to see it in one city. You're going to see it everywhere I go. I'm going to bring defeat. I'm going to win. And God gets his own glory. It's crazy. And it takes them 7 months. 7 months to figure it out. I mean, how slow can you be? It's really, really important to fear the Lord. It's really, really important to be faithful to him. It's really, really important to do as he's telling us to do. Man. Because, and again, we often look at the cost of following and we have disregard for the cost of not following. I can't imagine a sadder, can you imagine a sadder story than what Eli went through? And I wonder if he came back tonight and he said, why did you do that? Was it worth it? And he literally helped to leave the glory in Israel. And God's going to get it back. And the Philistines are going to return the ark. And God's going to do some amazing things. Does anyone have questions?